The first person to recognize her was not Lord Beaumont. It was not one of the powerful men who had spent 25 years protecting a secret. It was not even someone who knew the truth. It was a maid carrying fresh candles through the east corridor of Ravenshire House. The young woman stopped so abruptly that wax nearly spilled across the silver tray balanced in her hands. For one startled second, she simply stared. Then she lowered her eyes immediately and hurried away. Seraphina remained standing before the tall mirror, her pulse quickening despite herself. "What was that?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Whitmore fastened the final clasp of her silver-gray gown and stepped back to examine her work. "Reality," the older woman replied. "People are beginning to see you." The answer should not have unsettled her. Yet it did. Outside, snow drifted steadily across Ravenshire Square beneath a dark winter sky. Hundreds of carriage lamps glowed through the storm. Their golden light moved like distant stars beyond the frost-covered windows. Ravenshire House had hosted Christmas assemblies for generations. Powerful dukes, earls, viscounts, political advisors, military leaders, and royal guests had all crossed its marble floors. Tonight would be no different, except for one detail. Tonight, Seraphina Evercott would walk into that ballroom. For years she had existed on the edges of society, present but unseen, mentioned only when necessary, tolerated rather than welcomed. Now every instinct inside her urged retreat. "You are pale again," Mrs. Whitmore observed. Seraphina attempted a smile. "Perhaps because I am about to place myself in front of 300 strangers. 300 aristocrats. That is somehow worse." The older woman laughed softly. "You survived Lenora Evercott. You will survive a ballroom." Seraphina lowered her eyes toward her gloved hands. Her reflection looked unfamiliar tonight. The silver-gray gown shimmered beneath candlelight. Her dark hair had been arranged elegantly with delicate silver pins. She looked like a woman who belonged among England's highest circles. That was precisely the problem. She did not feel like one. Not yet. A knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Whitmore crossed the room immediately. The moment she opened it, Seraphina knew who stood outside. She did not need to see him. She recognized the silence that accompanied his presence. Duke Cassian Vailcrest rarely announced himself loudly. He did not need to. His authority entered rooms before his voice ever did. "Your Grace," Mrs. Whitmore greeted warmly. "We are nearly finished." "Good." His voice carried through the doorway. Calm, controlled, familiar. Something inside Seraphina settled unexpectedly at the sound. She hated that it did. Mrs. Whitmore glanced back toward her. "I believe I shall leave the final inspection to the Duke." Before Seraphina could protest, the older woman slipped out and quietly closed the door behind her. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Worse, the kind that made her aware of every beat of her heart. Slowly, she turned toward the doorway. Cassian stood just inside the room. Black evening coat, crisp white cravat, silver cufflinks reflecting candlelight. Snowflakes still lingered faintly on one shoulder where he had crossed the courtyard moments earlier. His gray eyes settled on her, then remained there. Seraphina immediately wished they had not. "You are staring." The observation escaped before she could stop it. One corner of his mouth moved very slightly. "Yes." She waited. He offered no explanation. Typical. "That is an unusually direct admission. You asked for honesty." "I did not ask for prolonged observation." Something almost resembling amusement touched his expression. Almost. Then it vanished. His gaze moved briefly across the room before returning to her. "You look prepared." That sounds suspiciously diplomatic. It was intended to be reassuring. "You are not particularly skilled at reassurance." "No." The answer came immediately. "I am usually occupied with other responsibilities." Despite herself, she smiled. A real smile this time. Brief but genuine. Cassian noticed. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly. The change lasted less than a second. Somehow it felt more significant because of that. Outside, church bells began ringing somewhere beyond the square. The distant sound drifted through the storm. Christmas Eve. The realization tightened something inside her chest. 1 year ago she had spent Christmas hidden in the Evercott estate, quietly helping servants decorate rooms she was rarely invited to enjoy. Tonight she stood inside Ravenshire House preparing to enter one of the most influential gatherings in England. Life could change quickly, sometimes too quickly. "Are you afraid?" Cashin asked. Serafina considered lying. Instead she answered honestly, "Yes." His expression remained steady. "Good." She blinked. "Good. Fear means you understand the importance of tonight. That is not remotely comforting." "I did not promise comfort." Again, despite herself, she laughed softly. The sound surprised both of them. For a moment neither spoke. Snow continued falling beyond the windows. Music drifted faintly upward from the ballroom below. The evening had begun. "What happens if everything goes wrong?" she asked quietly. Cashin studied her for several seconds before answering. "Define wrong." "Someone recognizes me." "That is likely." "Someone asks questions." "Also likely." "Someone mentions Evelyn Ashcombe." His gaze sharpened slightly. "Possible." Serafina looked away toward the window. "Someone reveals the truth." Silence settled between them, longer this time, more serious. When Cashin finally spoke, his voice had changed. Not colder, more deliberate. "Then we deal with it." She turned back toward him. "You make everything sound simple." "No." His gray eyes held hers completely now. "I simply refuse to panic before necessary." The answer reminded her of something he had said days earlier. Panic wastes time. Somehow hearing it again made breathing easier. Only slightly, but enough. Another knock interrupted them. A footman appeared moments later carrying a sealed envelope upon a silver tray. The young man looked unusually nervous. "Your Grace." Cashin accepted the envelope immediately. Serafina felt unease rise at once. Too many letters had arrived recently. Too many warnings. Too many threats disguised as advice. The Duke examined the seal. His expression remained unreadable. Then he broke it open. She watched carefully as his eyes moved across the contents. The room seemed to grow quieter with every passing second. Finally he folded the paper. "What is it?" she asked. Cashin hesitated. Never a reassuring sign. "Another anonymous message." Serafina closed her eyes briefly. "Of course it is." He handed her the letter. The handwriting looked unfamiliar. Sharp, controlled, deliberate. The message contained only one sentence. "If the girl enters the ballroom tonight, the past will enter with her." Her pulse slowed strangely as she read the words. Not from calm, from certainty. For weeks she had been receiving warnings. Every warning carried the same message beneath different language. Stay hidden. Remain invisible. Do not ask questions. Do not seek answers. Do not exist. Slowly she folded the letter, then handed it back. Cashin watched her carefully. "You appear less frightened than before. Perhaps because I am tired of being frightened." Something shifted behind his eyes. Respect, perhaps. Or recognition. "That is probably wise." Serafina crossed toward the window again. Snow covered the rooftops beyond Ravenshire Square in a blanket of white. London looked peaceful from a distance. Secrets always looked smaller from far away. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if nobody searched for the records?" she asked softly. Cashin joined her near the glass. "Not too close. Close enough." "Frequently." "What do you think?" He considered the question. "I think Lenora would still control the Evercott estate." "Probably." "I think the Ashcombe matter would remain buried." "Yes." "And I think you would spend another decade believing the wrong story about yourself." The words landed gently. That made them more powerful. Serafina stared at her reflection in the darkened window. For years she had believed she understood her place in the world. Unwanted stepdaughter. Forgotten woman. Family obligation. Now every piece of that identity had begun unraveling. Painful as the process was, she could not deny one truth. She preferred uncertainty to the lie. A distant swell of music rose from below. The assembly was beginning. Guests were arriving in greater numbers now. Voices drifted upward through the mansion. Laughter. Conversation. The rustle of expensive fabrics. the movement of people who had never doubted they belonged exactly where they stood. "It is time," Cashin said quietly. Serafina nodded, then stopped. "What if they look at me the way Lenora did?" The question emerged before she could stop it. Honest, vulnerable, dangerous. Cashin remained silent for several moments. When he finally answered, his voice was calm enough to steady storms. "Then they will be wrong as well." Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Not because the words were dramatic, because they were not. He spoke them like facts. Simple facts. Facts he believed completely. For a moment neither moved. Then the Duke extended his arm. Formal, proper, entirely appropriate. Yet the gesture carried a weight neither of them could ignore. Serafina looked at him, then at the ballroom waiting below, then at the years she had spent invisible. Slowly, she placed her hand upon his arm. Together they left the room. The corridors of Ravenshire House glowed beneath hundreds of candles. Footmen stood at attention beside polished doorways. Guests moved through drawing rooms and galleries throughout the mansion. Some conversations paused as the Duke and his guest passed. Serafina felt the attention immediately. Curious glances, quiet speculation, unanswered questions. For the first time in her life, people were looking directly at her. Not through her, not around her. The realization was both terrifying and strangely liberating. They reached the grand staircase overlooking the ballroom entrance. Music rose beautifully from below. Violins, cellos, piano. The warm sound filled the house. Serafina paused at the top step. Hundreds of lights sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers. Elegant gowns moved across polished marble floors. England's most powerful families gathered beneath the vast painted ceiling. Every instinct told her to turn around. Cashin seemed to sense it immediately. "Miss Evercott." She looked up. "Yes." His expression remained composed, controlled. Yet something softer lived beneath the control tonight. "Do not lower your eyes." The words entered her quietly. She understood them instantly. Not instruction. Reminder. For years she had been taught to make herself smaller. Less visible. Less noticeable. Less inconvenient. Tonight would require something different. Slowly, Serafina straightened her shoulders. Then she descended the first step. And the second. And the third. Conversations continued below. Laughter echoed across the ballroom. Nobody noticed her yet. Not really. Not until she reached the final landing beside the Duke. Then something changed. Heads turned. One after another. Recognition spread slowly through the crowd. Not recognition of identity. Recognition of importance. The Duke of Ravenshire had entered with a woman no one expected. The whispers began almost immediately. Serafina felt them moving through the room like ripples across water. Curiosity, speculation, questions. She forced herself not to retreat. Beside her, Cashin remained perfectly calm. Then, across the ballroom, a silver-haired man stopped mid-conversation. His glass remained suspended halfway to his lips. His expression froze. Lord Beaumont had just seen her, and for the first time since she entered Ravenshire House, genuine shock broke through his perfect aristocratic control. Lord Beaumont recovered faster than most men would have. Years of political influence and aristocratic survival had taught him how to hide surprise beneath discipline. Yet Serafina had already seen it. The recognition, the shock, the impossible certainty that flashed across his face before control buried it again. Around them, conversations continued flowing through the ballroom. Guests moved beneath crystal chandeliers. Musicians played a graceful winter waltz near the far wall. Servants crossed the room carrying silver trays filled with champagne glasses and delicate desserts. To everyone else, the moment lasted only a second. To Serafina, it felt much longer. Beaumont lowered his glass carefully and excused himself from the group surrounding him. Three gentlemen immediately turned to watch his departure with mild confusion. Apparently, even among England's highest circles, Lord Beaumont rarely abandoned conversations without reason. Serafina felt her pulse quicken. Beside her, Cashin noticed the movement immediately. Of course he did. Very little escaped Duke Cashin Valecrest. "He is coming here," she said quietly. Yes. You sound remarkably calm about that. I expected it. She glanced toward him. You expected him to recognize me? Cashin's eyes remained fixed on the approaching man. I expected him to react. Beaumont crossed the ballroom slowly, deliberately, not hurried, not hesitant. Every step reflected the confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Yet tonight something appeared different. Serafina could not identify it immediately. Then she realized what she was seeing. Uncertainty. Very little. Barely visible. But present. The realization unsettled her more than confidence would have. Lord Beaumont finally stopped several feet away. Close enough for conversation. Far enough to maintain propriety. His silver hair reflected the candlelight above. His expression appeared perfectly composed now. Only his eyes betrayed him. They remained fixed on Serafina with the intensity of someone staring directly into the past. Your Grace. Beaumont inclined his head slightly toward Cashin. A magnificent gathering as always. Lord Beaumont. Cashin's tone remained neutral. You are kind to say so. Silence followed. Brief. Heavy. Beaumont's attention returned immediately to Serafina. She felt it settle upon her like weight. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Something far more complicated. Miss Evercott. His voice sounded smooth and measured. I believe this is the first time we have met properly. Serafina studied him carefully. I believe so. Another pause. Around them, curiosity had already begun spreading. Several nearby guests pretended not to watch. They failed completely. Beaumont noticed the attention too. Yet he seemed unconcerned by it. You resemble someone I once knew. The statement arrived softly, almost casually. Yet it struck harder than if he had spoken loudly. Serafina held his gaze. My mother. Something shifted immediately in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. Confirmation. For one brief second, neither man nor woman around them seemed aware of the ballroom anymore. Beaumont exhaled slowly. Yes. The answer entered the space between them like a stone dropped into still water. Nearby conversations continued. Music played. Candles flickered. Yet everything felt different now. Serafina lowered her eyes momentarily. Not from fear. From the strange ache that accompanied hearing someone acknowledge Evelyn Ashcombe as real. Not rumor. Not mystery. Real. You knew her. Beaumont's gaze softened unexpectedly. I did. Well? The question escaped before she could stop it. What was she like? For the first time since approaching them, the older man's expression changed completely. Something distant entered his eyes. Memory. Regret. Loss. Remarkably brave, he said quietly. Far braver than she should have needed to be. The answer struck deeper than Serafina expected. She looked away briefly toward the dancers moving across the polished floor. All her life she had imagined countless versions of the woman whose face resembled her own. Tonight, for the first time, someone who truly knew Evelyn Ashcombe stood before her. Tell me more. Beaumont remained silent for several seconds. Then his attention shifted briefly toward the ballroom surrounding them. Hundreds of people. Hundreds of ears. Hundreds of opportunities for disaster. This is not the place. Cashin spoke before Serafina could answer. For once, we agree. Beaumont's eyes narrowed slightly. I imagine that does not happen often. Not nearly often enough. Despite the tension, a faint smile touched Beaumont's mouth, then disappeared. Serafina watched the exchange carefully. These two men shared history, not friendship. Something more complicated. Years of unfinished conversations, hidden beneath formal courtesy. There is another matter, Beaumont said quietly. His gaze returned to Serafina. A more immediate one. Unease stirred inside her chest. What matter? The older man hesitated. Long enough to matter. Long enough for Cashin to notice. Lord Beaumont. The Duke's voice carried a warning now. Beaumont ignored it. His attention remained fixed on Serafina. You have your mother's eyes. She blinked. So I have been told. No. His expression darkened slightly. Not merely the color. Silence settled around them. The orchestra shifted into another melody. Laughter drifted across the ballroom from distant corners. Yet the small circle surrounding the three of them felt strangely isolated. Beaumont continued watching her, studying her, measuring her against memories 25 years old. "What are you trying to say?" Serafina asked. The older man's gaze softened again. "Only that seeing you standing here is unexpected." The final word seemed insufficient somehow, as though he wished to say something else and chose not to. Cashin noticed. "Unexpected because she resembles Evelyn?" Beaumont looked toward him. "Partly. And the rest?" Another silence. This one longer. More dangerous. Serafina felt curiosity tighten inside her chest. There it was again. Another hidden piece. Another unfinished answer. The story of her life seemed built entirely from fragments. Finally Beaumont spoke. "Because she resembles someone else as well." Serafina felt her pulse stop briefly. Cashin's expression hardened immediately. Not visibly to others. She saw it anyway. "Someone else?" she asked. Beaumont nodded once. Slowly. "Yes." "Who?" The question entered the air almost as a whisper. The older man studied her face. Then the ballroom. Then Cashin. Something like conflict moved briefly through his eyes. "Not tonight." Disappointment hit harder than expected. "You cannot say that and then refuse to explain." "I can." His voice remained gentle. "And for your sake I must." Frustration rose inside her. Sharp. Immediate. Yet beneath it lived something stronger. Certainty. He knew. Lord Beaumont knew exactly what she had spent weeks trying to uncover. Cashin stepped slightly closer. Not enough for impropriety. Enough to alter the atmosphere. "You are making a mistake." Beaumont looked toward him calmly. "Perhaps. You are certainly creating more questions. Questions already exist." His gaze shifted back toward Serafina. "Some answers arrive more safely than others." She almost laughed at that. Almost. "Nothing about the last 2 weeks has felt particularly safe." To her surprise, Beaumont nodded. "A fair observation." Another silence followed. Then a footman approached carrying fresh champagne. Beaumont accepted a glass absent-mindedly without breaking eye contact. The movement seemed automatic. Distracted. Unusual for a man reputed to miss nothing. "Miss Evercott." His voice softened slightly. "May I offer one piece of advice?" Serafina hesitated, then nodded. "Do not allow other people to define your worth based upon the circumstances of your birth." The statement landed harder than anything else he had said. Harder because it sounded personal. Harder because it sounded like regret. For a moment she saw not a powerful aristocrat but an aging man carrying old mistakes. Then the moment vanished. Beaumont straightened. The familiar mask returned. "Enjoy the evening." He inclined his head formally. "Your Grace." Cashin offered a brief nod. Beaumont turned and walked away. The crowd gradually absorbed him once more. Conversations resumed around his path. The ballroom breathed again. Yet Serafina remained standing exactly where she was, watching him disappear, thinking, wondering, remembering every hesitation, every unfinished sentence, every look. "He knows," she said quietly. Cashin did not pretend otherwise. "Yes, more than he admitted. Considerably more." Serafina exhaled slowly. The frustration remained. So did something else. Hope. Strange, dangerous hope. Because for the first time since this mystery began, she had looked directly into the eyes of someone who remembered her mother. Someone who had spoken Evelyn Ashcombe's name without fear. "What did he mean?" she asked. "About resembling someone else?" Cashin remained silent for several moments. Long enough to make her turn toward him. The expression she found there surprised her. Not uncertainty. Calculation. "Cashin." His gaze shifted toward the dancers. "I do not know." She stared. "You are lying." One eyebrow lifted slightly. "Am I?" "You hesitate differently when you truly do not know something." To her astonishment, genuine amusement appeared briefly in his eyes. "That is a remarkably specific observation. I have had practice." The corner of his mouth moved again. Almost a smile. Then he looked away before she could be certain. Perhaps I have suspicions. And suspicions are not facts. Before she could argue further, movement across the ballroom caught her attention. Near the far entrance, another guest had just arrived. A tall gentleman in formal evening attire, dark hair touched with silver at the temples. Distinguished, reserved. Several aristocrats immediately turned toward him with visible respect. Serafina noticed something else. The moment the man entered, Lord Beaumont stopped walking, then looked directly toward him. Not casually, intentionally. Recognition passed between them. Not friendship, understanding. The newcomer glanced across the crowded ballroom. His gaze moved over dozens of faces, then stopped, directly on Serafina. She felt it instantly, not because the look was hostile, because it carried the exact same shock Beaumont had shown minutes earlier. The gentleman froze, only for a second, then recovered. But the damage was done. Serafina had seen it. So had Cashin. The Duke's posture changed immediately. Subtle, controlled, alert. "Who is that?" she asked quietly. Cashin's eyes never left the newcomer. "That," he said carefully, "is a man who should not be surprised to see you." And across the ballroom, the stranger continued staring at her, as though he had just seen a ghost walk into Ravenshire House. The stranger did not approach immediately. That made the situation worse. If he had crossed the ballroom at once, Serafina might have dismissed the reaction as surprise. Instead, he remained where he was, speaking briefly with a silver-haired count near the entrance while continuing to glance toward her at intervals that felt far too deliberate to be accidental. The Christmas assembly carried on around them. Music drifted beneath crystal chandeliers. Couples moved gracefully across the polished floor. Servants circulated with silver trays. Yet Serafina could no longer focus on any of it. Her attention remained fixed on the man across the room. "Who is he?" she asked again. Cashin watched the gentleman carefully before answering. "Sir Alistair Wren." The name meant nothing to her. Should it? Not to most people. But not most people are receiving anonymous threats and discovering hidden identities. Something almost resembling approval flickered briefly across his expression. A fair observation. Serafina folded her hands together lightly. "Then tell me who he is." Cashin remained silent for several seconds, long enough to confirm that the answer mattered. 25 years ago," he said quietly, "Alistair Wren served as legal advisor to the Royal Advisory Council." Her pulse quickened immediately. The same council connected to Evelyn Ashcombe. Yes. She stared across the ballroom. Suddenly the man's reaction made far more sense. "Then he knows something. Almost certainly. And you allowed him into your house tonight?" Ravenshire House hosts half of Parliament every winter. Cashin's tone remained dry. "Unfortunately, I cannot interrogate every guest at the door." Despite her anxiety, the answer nearly made her smile. Nearly. Her attention shifted back toward Sir Alistair. The older gentleman appeared distinguished rather than intimidating. His posture remained upright. His dark evening coat fit impeccably. Several younger aristocrats seemed eager to earn his attention. Yet beneath the polished appearance lived something she recognized immediately. Caution. The same caution she had spent years carrying herself. People learned that expression when they knew more than they were willing to say. Across the ballroom, Sir Alistair finished his conversation and accepted a glass from a passing servant. Then, unexpectedly, he began moving toward them. Serafina felt her heartbeat quicken. Cashin noticed. "Breathe." She glanced toward him. That was unusually direct. "You have stopped doing it properly." Annoyingly, he was correct. She inhaled slowly, exhaled, forced calm. By then Sir Alistair had nearly reached them. Unlike Beaumont, he appeared less composed upon close inspection. Not frightened, troubled. As though seeing her had unsettled memories he preferred buried. He stopped several feet away and inclined his head respectfully toward Cashin. "Your Grace." "Sir Alistair." Cashin's tone revealed nothing. "A pleasant surprise." "I suspect surprises have become rather common this evening." The older man's gaze shifted immediately to Serafina. Not subtle. Not disguised. Honest. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Sir Alistair exhaled softly. Good Lord. The words emerged almost as a whisper. Seraphina held his gaze. I assume that means you recognize me. A faint smile touched his face, sad rather than amused. No, Miss Evercott. He paused. I recognize your mother. The ballroom seemed to narrow around her. Not because the statement was unexpected, because hearing it spoken aloud still carried tremendous force. Sir Alistair studied her face carefully. The resemblance is extraordinary. You knew Evelyn Ashcombe? Very well. The answer arrived without hesitation, more direct than Beaumont had been. Immediately, Seraphina sensed the difference between the two men. Beaumont carried guilt. Alistair carried grief. Tell me about her. His expression softened. She was intelligent. A brief pause followed. Far too intelligent for the society surrounding her. That sounds familiar. To her surprise, he laughed quietly. Yes, it does. Cashin remained silent beside her, watching, evaluating every word. Sir Alistair noticed. You distrust me. Should I not? Cashin asked calmly. Possibly not. The older gentleman glanced toward the dancers before returning his attention to Seraphina. Your mother asked difficult questions. Questions powerful people preferred to avoid. Something inside Seraphina tightened. The description felt strangely personal. About politics? About justice? The answer settled heavily between them. Alistair continued. Many people remember Evelyn as a scandal. They are wrong. His voice lowered slightly. She was one of the few genuinely honorable people I have ever known. For a moment Seraphina could not answer. All her life Evelyn Ashcombe had existed as mystery, rumor, secret, shadow. Now, piece by piece, a real woman was emerging from the darkness. Intelligent, brave, honorable, human. What happened to her? She asked softly. Sir Alistair's eyes darkened. The change occurred instantly. That is a complicated question. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it remains true. Frustration flickered through her chest. She was tired of fragments, tired of half-truths, tired of standing at the edge of answers. Did she disappear willingly? The older man's expression became very still. No. The certainty in his voice shocked her. Then why was she hidden? Silence followed. Longer this time. More dangerous. Across the ballroom, music shifted into another dance. Guests applauded politely. None of them understood that a 25-year-old mystery stood inches from unraveling beside the ballroom wall. Finally, Alistair spoke. Because certain people feared what she knew. Seraphina felt cold despite the warmth surrounding them. What did she know? His gaze drifted briefly toward Cashin, then back to her. That depends which secret you mean. Her pulse quickened immediately. Which secret? Not what secret. Which secret? There had been more than one. Cashin's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He had noticed the wording too. Sir Alistair. The Duke's voice remained calm. Choose your next sentence carefully. I intend to. The older gentleman hesitated, then looked directly at Seraphina. Have you seen the council records? Some of them. The Ashcombe file? Parts of it. He nodded slowly. Then you already know Evelyn became connected to an inquiry involving several noble houses. Yes. What you may not know is that the inquiry was never the real problem. Silence settled immediately. Even Cashin became completely still. Seraphina felt her heart pounding now. What do you mean? Alistair lowered his voice. The investigation uncovered financial corruption, inheritance manipulation, and political coercion. Those matters were serious. He paused. But they were not why people became afraid. Her breath caught. Then why? The older gentleman studied her face. For one suspended moment, she saw genuine conflict inside him. Duty battling conscience. Loyalty battling truth. Then conscience appeared to win. Because Evelyn discovered a connection between several noble families and a man who should never have been involved. Seraphina stared. Who? Before Alistair could answer, another voice interrupted. I wondered how long it would take before someone started telling the story incorrectly. All three turned immediately. Lord Beaumont stood only a few feet away. No one had seen him approach. His expression remained controlled. Yet tension lived behind his eyes now. Not anger, determination. The two older men regarded each other across the crowded ballroom. History passed silently between them. Decades of it. Sir Alistair exhaled slowly. I suspected you were listening. You should have known. Beaumont's gaze shifted toward Seraphina. Miss Evercott deserves the truth. At last we agree on something, Alistair replied. The truth, Beaumont said quietly, is exactly why this conversation should not happen in a ballroom. Seraphina looked from one man to the other. Then stop speaking as though I am not standing here. Neither responded immediately. That silence told her everything. They both knew more than they wanted to reveal publicly. Much more. Beaumont glanced briefly toward the crowd surrounding them. Several nearby guests had already begun paying attention. Curiosity spread quickly among aristocrats. Not here, he said firmly. Then where? Seraphina asked. Beaumont met her gaze. For the first time since she met him, there was no hesitation in his expression. No evasion. No ambiguity. Only decision. Tomorrow morning. Her pulse quickened. Tomorrow. Yes. He looked toward Cashin. Ravenshire House. Silence followed. Then Beaumont added the sentence that changed everything. Because after 25 years, it is finally time for her to see the document that names her father. The world seemed to stop. Music continued. Voices continued. Dancers continued moving beneath the chandeliers. Yet Seraphina heard none of it. Only those words. The document that names her father. Beside her, Cashin became absolutely motionless. Across from them, Sir Alistair closed his eyes briefly as though a decision long delayed had finally arrived. And somewhere deep inside Seraphina, a lifetime of unanswered questions suddenly moved one step closer to the truth. For several seconds after Beaumont spoke, Seraphina forgot how to breathe. The document that names her father. The sentence echoed through her mind while the ballroom continued moving around her as though nothing extraordinary had happened. A violin melody drifted beneath the chandeliers. Laughter rose from distant groups of guests. Crystal glasses reflected candlelight across polished marble floors. Yet everything felt different now. 24 years of uncertainty had suddenly narrowed into a single promise. Tomorrow. One document. One name. Beside her, Cashin remained perfectly still. The Duke's expression revealed almost nothing. Almost. Seraphina had spent enough time around him to notice subtle changes others missed. The slight tightening near his jaw. The sharpened focus behind his gray eyes. The absolute stillness that always appeared when he was thinking several moves ahead. Beaumont noticed it too. You disapprove, the older man observed calmly. I distrust dramatic announcements delivered in crowded ballrooms. Beaumont's mouth curved faintly. And yet here we are. Sir Alistair sighed softly. You could have waited until morning. No. Beaumont's gaze shifted toward Seraphina. She deserved certainty tonight. The answer settled heavily between them. For the first time, Seraphina found herself unable to argue. Certainty. That was exactly what Beaumont had given her. Not answers. Not yet. But certainty that answers existed. The distinction mattered more than she could explain. Across the ballroom, another waltz began. Several couples moved gracefully onto the dance floor. The evening should have felt elegant, festive. Instead it now felt suspended. Every conversation seemed to exist beneath the shadow of tomorrow. Sir Alistair glanced toward the crowd. People are beginning to watch. He was correct. Several nearby guests had become noticeably interested in their small gathering. Nothing overt. Aristocrats rarely stared openly. They simply became exceptionally poor at pretending not to listen. Beaumont followed his gaze and nodded once. Then perhaps we should exercise restraint for the remainder of the evening. A remarkable concept, Cashin replied dryly. To Seraphina's surprise, Beaumont actually laughed. The sound transformed him briefly. For a moment he appeared less like a powerful political figure and more like an aging man carrying old memories. Then the moment vanished. Tomorrow morning, he repeated. 10 o'clock. Cashin inclined his head once. Ravenshire House. Beaumont's attention returned to Seraphina. Something unreadable moved through his eyes. Regret, perhaps. Or responsibility. Try to sleep tonight. The advice sounded almost impossible. Before she could respond, he turned and disappeared back into the crowd. Sir Alistair lingered a moment longer. Miss Evercott. She looked toward him. Yes. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember something? His expression softened. Your mother loved you. The statement hit harder than any revelation. Harder than hidden records. Harder than secret inheritances. For one painful second, Seraphina could not speak. Sir Alistair seemed to understand. He simply bowed and departed quietly, leaving her standing beside Cashin beneath the ballroom lights. Silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, heavy, thoughtful. Eventually she exhaled. I do not think I can survive until tomorrow. You will. That sounded suspiciously certain. Experience. She looked toward him. Experience with discovering hidden fathers? One eyebrow lifted slightly. No. Experience with difficult waiting. Despite everything, the answer made her smile faintly. They began walking slowly along the edge of the ballroom. The crowd parted naturally around Cashin. Power often worked that way. Not loudly, effortlessly. Seraphina noticed dozens of glances following them. Some curious, some admiring, some speculative. Yet none carried the cruelty she once expected from society. Not tonight. Something had changed. Or perhaps she had. They paused near one of the tall windows overlooking the snow-covered square. Outside, London glowed beneath winter darkness. Carriage lamps moved along distant streets like drifting stars. Snow continued falling gently. Do you think Beaumont will tell the truth? She asked quietly. Cashin considered the question. Part of it. Only part. Truth is rarely delivered all at once by people who spent decades hiding it. The answer felt painfully accurate. She folded her arms lightly. Sometimes I wonder if everyone in England knows more about my life than I do. An understandable conclusion. Not a comforting one. No. His voice softened slightly. Probably not. The warmth of the ballroom surrounded them. Yet Seraphina suddenly felt tired. Not physically. Emotionally. Weeks of revelations had begun accumulating. Lenora. The inheritance. Evelyn Ashcombe. Hidden investigations. Anonymous threats. Secret records. Unknown fathers. Any one of those discoveries would have altered a life. Together they felt overwhelming. Cashin seemed to sense the shift immediately. You are exhausted. She sighed. That observation is becoming a habit. You keep proving it correct. I dislike how often that happens. The faintest trace of amusement touched his expression, then vanished. A group of guests approached from across the ballroom. An older duchess accompanied by two younger women. All three wore expressions carefully balanced between courtesy and curiosity. Seraphina recognized the look instantly. Society had finally decided she existed. The realization felt strange. The Duchess offered a graceful smile. Your Grace. Cashin bowed politely. Formal introductions followed. Names drifted through the conversation. Compliments. Seasonal observations. Harmless social exchanges. Yet throughout the entire interaction, Seraphina noticed something remarkable. No one dismissed her. No one ignored her. No one treated her as an inconvenience. They asked her questions. They listened to her answers. They acknowledged her presence. Such simple things. Yet after years inside the Evercott household, they felt extraordinary. When the women eventually moved away, Seraphina remained thoughtful. What? Cashin asked. She looked toward the dancers. I spent years believing society would reject me. And most of society does not even know me. The realization sounded almost absurd when spoken aloud. Cashin nodded once. Many fears become smaller when exposed to daylight. She smiled faintly. That was nearly philosophical. Do not tell anyone. The answer startled a genuine laugh from her. Several nearby guests glanced over. Seraphina immediately covered her mouth, embarrassed. Cashin simply watched her. For one suspended moment, neither looked away. The noise of the ballroom seemed distant, softer somehow. Then the spell broke. A servant approached carrying a silver tray. Upon it rested a sealed envelope. Seraphina's stomach tightened instantly. Cashin's expression darkened. The footman bowed respectfully. A message was delivered for Miss Evercott, Your Grace. Every trace of warmth disappeared from the moment. Slowly, Cashin accepted the envelope. The seal bore no family crest, no identifying mark, just plain black wax. Exactly the sort of letter they had come to distrust. Several nearby guests noticed the exchange. Curiosity flickered across their faces. Cashin examined the envelope briefly before handing it to Seraphina. Your choice. Her pulse quickened. For a second she considered refusing. Then she remembered something. Every anonymous message so far had tried to accomplish the same goal. Fear. Silence. Retreat. She was tired of all three. Carefully she broke the seal. A single sheet of paper rested inside. Only one sentence had been written across the center. Seraphina read it once. Then again. The words seemed almost unreal. Her face drained of color. Cashin noticed immediately. What is it? She handed him the note without speaking. His eyes moved across the page. Instantly, every trace of calm amusement vanished from his expression. For the first time that evening, genuine concern appeared. Seraphina stared toward the ballroom floor, while her pulse hammered beneath her ribs. Around them, the Christmas assembly continued unaware. Music played. Guests danced. Snow fell beyond the windows. And in the middle of all that beauty, one sentence had just changed everything. Because the anonymous message did not contain a threat. Contained a warning. The document naming your father was removed from the archives 2 hours ago. For one suspended moment, the entire ballroom seemed to disappear. Seraphina could still hear the orchestra. She could still see guests moving beneath crystal chandeliers. Yet none of it felt real anymore. Her attention remained fixed on the folded note in Cashin's hand. The document naming your father was removed from the archives 2 hours ago. The timing felt impossible. Too precise. Too deliberate. Someone had known Beaumont intended to reveal the truth. Someone had acted before morning arrived. Cashin read the message a second time. Then folded it carefully and slipped it inside his coat. His expression revealed almost nothing. That frightened her more than visible concern. Do you believe it? She asked quietly. I do not know. The answer came immediately. Honest. Uncomfortable. That is not reassuring. No. His gaze moved across the ballroom. Measuring. Calculating. It is not intended to be. Seraphina followed his line of sight. Hundreds of people filled the room. Any one of them could be carrying information. Any one of them could be responsible. The realization left her feeling strangely exposed. Someone knew. Her voice lowered. Someone knew Beaumont planned to tell me. Possibly. Possibly. She turned toward him. The note appeared moments after he announced it. Cashin nodded once. Which means one of two things. What? Either the message is genuine. His eyes remained on the crowd. Or someone wants us to believe it is. The distinction settled heavily between them. Seraphina hated that he was right. Every development in this mystery seemed designed to create uncertainty. Truth and deception intertwined so completely that separating them felt impossible. Nearby, a new set of dancers entered the floor. Applause echoed through the ballroom. The normalcy of it all felt almost absurd. What happens now? She asked. Cashin remained silent for several moments. Then his gaze landed on a footman standing near the far wall. The servant immediately straightened. Apparently even from across a crowded ballroom, the Duke of Ravenshire could communicate instructions without speaking. Now, Cashin said calmly, we verify the information. Before she could ask how, the footman was already moving quickly toward them. Moments later he arrived and bowed respectfully. Your Grace. Cashin lowered his voice. Find Mr. Harcourt. The servant nodded immediately. At once, Your Grace. Then he disappeared back into the crowd. Seraphina watched him go. Who is Mr. Harcourt? Head archivist for House Valecrest. Her pulse quickened. You brought an archivist to a Christmas assembly? For the first time since receiving the note, Something almost resembling amusement touched his expression. I brought 3. She stared. 3. Experience has taught me that historical mysteries rarely respect holidays. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Almost. The familiar rhythm of their conversations helped steady her. Only slightly, but enough to breathe. Across the ballroom, Lord Beaumont was speaking with several political figures near one of the fireplaces. He looked completely composed, untroubled. Yet Serafina could not stop wondering whether he already knew about the missing document. The possibility tightened her chest. Should we tell him? She asked. Cashin followed her gaze. Not yet. You distrust him that much? I distrust timing. The answer carried the weight of long experience. She looked away. Snow continued falling beyond the tall windows, white against darkness, peaceful from a distance. Nothing about the evening felt peaceful anymore. A movement near the staircase caught her attention. At first she thought little of it. Guests came and went constantly throughout the mansion. Then she noticed something strange. A man stood near the upper landing overlooking the ballroom, not participating in conversation, not watching the dancers, watching her. The realization arrived instantly, sharp and undeniable. Serafina became very still. The stranger wore formal evening clothes. Nothing remarkable. Dark coat, white cravat, silver cuff links. The sort of appearance designed to disappear into aristocratic crowds. Yet his attention remained fixed on her. Not curiosity, observation. She had seen that look before, in the surveillance sketch discovered weeks earlier. The memory returned immediately. Confirm whether the girl resembles Evelyn before proceeding further. Cold moved through her chest. Cashin. His attention shifted instantly. What is it? She nodded subtly toward the staircase. The Duke's gaze followed. The moment he located the man, something changed in his expression. Very slight, very dangerous. Do not look again, he said quietly. That is generally poor advice after telling me someone is suspicious. Trust me anyway. She forced herself to focus on the ballroom instead. Every instinct urged another glance. She resisted. Barely. Do you recognize him? No. His answer arrived too quickly. Then he corrected himself. Not personally. Meaning I recognize the behavior. Unease deepened. You make that sound ominous. Because it usually is. The orchestra shifted into a slower piece. Couples gathered near the dance floor. Guests exchanged greetings and seasonal wishes. Around them, Christmas continued. Yet beneath the elegance, tension had begun tightening like wire. Several minutes passed. Neither mentioned the man again. Finally, Serafina could no longer resist. Is he still there? Cashin's gaze moved briefly toward the staircase. No. Relief came instantly, then vanished, because his expression did not improve. That was not reassuring either. No. He looked directly at her. It was not. Before she could press further, the footman returned. Another gentleman accompanied him. Middle-aged, thin, precisely dressed. Intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Mr. Harcourt. The archivist bowed respectfully. Your Grace. Cashin wasted no time. A hypothetical question. Harcourt's eyebrows lifted slightly. Hypothetical. Assume a document was removed from government archives earlier this evening. The archivist considered this. Difficult. Why? Because most sensitive records are tracked. Could someone remove one quietly? Harcourt hesitated. Someone influential? Yes. The archivist's expression darkened. Unfortunately, Serafina felt her stomach tighten. Cashin noticed. Of course he did. How quickly could we verify such a removal? The older man thought for several moments. Normally? Tomorrow. And abnormally? Harcourt almost smiled. If I sent inquiries immediately, perhaps before sunrise. Hope flickered. Small but real. Do it, Cashin said. At once. Harcourt nodded without hesitation. Understood. He departed quickly. Serafina watched him disappear into the crowd. Before sunrise, she repeated quietly. Perhaps. Cashin's voice remained measured. We do not know whether the message is truthful. Someone certainly wanted us to believe it. Yes. His gray eyes moved toward the ballroom entrance. That concerns me more. Silence followed. Then something unexpected happened. A young woman approached them, barely older than Serafina. Elegant dark green gown, confident posture, kind eyes. She smiled warmly, not cautiously, not strategically, genuinely. Miss Evercott? Serafina blinked. Yes. The young woman offered her hand. Lady Charlotte Pembroke. The name sounded vaguely familiar. We have not met. No. Charlotte smiled. But I wanted to introduce myself before half of London starts inventing stories. The straightforward honesty startled a laugh from Serafina. Charlotte brightened immediately. There. That expression suits you much better than anxiety. For several minutes the conversation remained pleasantly ordinary. Weather, music, Christmas traditions. Nothing mysterious. Nothing political. Nothing dangerous. Serafina found herself relaxing despite everything. Human normalcy felt surprisingly precious after weeks of secrets. Eventually Charlotte lowered her voice. May I tell you something? Of course. The young woman's smile softened. Most of society is not nearly as frightening as people claim. Serafina glanced around the ballroom. You may be the first person to suggest that. Then everyone else lacks imagination. The answer drew another genuine smile. Charlotte squeezed her hand briefly before departing. The interaction lasted less than 10 minutes. Yet after she left, Serafina felt lighter. Not because her problems had disappeared. Because someone had treated her as a person instead of a mystery. Cashin noticed immediately. You seem happier. That sounded dangerously observant. Occupational hazard. She shook her head softly. Then her smile faded. Because she had just noticed something. Across the ballroom, near the far doorway, stood the same man from the staircase. He had returned. Worse, he was no longer watching her. He was watching Lord Beaumont. Serafina felt cold spread through her chest. Slowly, she touched Cashin's sleeve. The Duke followed her gaze. His entire posture changed. Completely. The stranger spoke briefly with a servant, then slipped through the doorway and vanished from sight. Beaumont noticed the movement at the exact same moment. Their eyes met across the ballroom. And for the first time all evening, genuine alarm appeared on Lord Beaumont's face. Lord Beaumont's reaction lasted less than a second. Most people in the ballroom never noticed it. Serafina did. So did Cashin. The older man's face remained composed. His posture never changed. Yet something flashed through his eyes before discipline buried it again. Recognition. Not of the stranger himself. Of whatever the stranger represented. He knows him, Serafina said quietly. Cashin did not look away from Beaumont. Yes. Across the ballroom, Beaumont excused himself from his companions with unusual speed. The movement appeared polite, controlled, entirely appropriate. Yet he was already heading toward the doorway where the stranger had disappeared. Cashin made a decision instantly. Stay here. Serafina turned toward him. Absolutely not. His gaze shifted to hers. Calm. Steady. Miss Evercott. No. She surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. Every time someone tells me to stay behind, another piece of my life disappears into a private conversation. For a moment neither spoke. The orchestra continued playing. Snow drifted beyond the windows. Around them, the Christmas assembly remained beautifully unaware of the tension unfolding beneath its glittering surface. Cashin studied her carefully. Then something almost approving appeared behind his eyes. You are becoming difficult. I learned from excellent examples. One corner of his mouth moved briefly. Then he exhaled. Very well. Relief arrived immediately. Thank you. Do not make me regret it. Together they moved through the ballroom. Not quickly enough to attract attention. Not slowly enough to lose sight of Beaumont. Years of social discipline allowed the older man to cross crowded rooms without appearing hurried. Unfortunately for him, Cashin possessed the same skill. They reached the doorway moments after Beaumont disappeared through it. Beyond lay a quieter section of Ravenshire House. Long corridors lined with portraits. Smaller drawing rooms reserved for private conversations. The music faded behind them. The silence felt different here. More intimate. More dangerous. Serafina glanced back once toward the ballroom. Light and laughter remained visible through the open doors. The contrast felt strange, as though two entirely different worlds existed within the same house. Ahead, Beaumont stood at the end of the corridor speaking with someone hidden from view around a corner. His voice carried faintly through the quiet, tense, controlled. This was not the agreement. Serafina slowed immediately. Cashin raised one finger slightly. Wait, they remained where they were. Far enough away to avoid discovery. Close enough to hear fragments. Another voice answered. Male. Unfamiliar. Calm. The situation changed. Beaumont's shoulders stiffened. You had no authority to approach her. The stranger replied something too soft to catch. Beaumont's response arrived instantly. Do not use that excuse with me. Serafina felt her pulse quicken. The conversation was not what she expected. Beaumont sounded angry, not defensive, not protective of secrets. Angry. The realization shifted something inside her understanding of him. Then footsteps echoed from another corridor. Beaumont immediately fell silent. A servant appeared carrying fresh candles. The brief interruption ended any chance of hearing more. By the time the servant passed, the stranger had already moved away. Cashin and Serafina reached the corner moments later. The corridor beyond stood empty. Only Beaumont remained. The older man looked up sharply when he saw them. Surprise flickered across his face. Then resignation. I should have known. Cashin's voice remained calm. You usually do. Beaumont glanced toward Serafina. You were not supposed to hear that. I am discovering that many things were not supposed to happen. The answer seemed to affect him more than she intended. He looked away briefly, toward one of the tall windows overlooking the snow-covered gardens. Fair enough. Silence settled between them. Then Cashin asked the question both of them were thinking. Who was he? Beaumont's jaw tightened. Not dramatically. Enough. A messenger. From whom? Another pause. Serafina watched carefully. Beaumont was choosing his words, weighing consequences. Someone connected to the old inquiry. Cold moved through her chest. The Ashcombe inquiry? Yes. She stepped closer before hesitation could stop her. Then stopped speaking in fragments. The words emerged sharper than intended. Years of frustration finally surfacing. Everyone keeps treating me as though I cannot handle the truth. Beaumont met her gaze directly. The truth is precisely what I am trying to protect. From whom? His expression changed unexpectedly. Not anger. Sadness. From what it may cost you. The answer landed heavily. Serafina looked away first. Not because she accepted it. Because part of her understood it. Some truths carried consequences. She knew that now. Yet ignorance carried consequences too. Cashin's voice broke the silence. The document. Beaumont looked toward him immediately. What about it? An anonymous message claims it was removed from the archives. The older man's entire expression hardened. Instantly. No hesitation. No confusion. Genuine reaction. When? 2 hours ago. Beaumont swore softly under his breath. The response shocked all three of them. He seemed to realize it immediately, then exhaled. Slowly. Then the message may be accurate. Serafina felt her stomach tighten. You believe it? I believe someone anticipated tomorrow. The corridor suddenly felt colder. Outside, snow continued falling beyond the tall windows. White against darkness. Peaceful. Unaware. Beaumont crossed toward the glass and stood silently for several moments. His reflection appeared older there. More tired. When he finally spoke again, his voice sounded different. Less political. More personal. There is something I never told your mother. Serafina became very still. The conversation had shifted unexpectedly. Beaumont remained facing the window. The night Evelyn disappeared, she came to me first. Silence followed. Heavy and immediate. Why? Serafina asked quietly. Because she trusted me. Regret entered every syllable. God help me. She trusted me. Cashin remained silent. watching, listening. Beaumont continued. She knew powerful people wanted the inquiry buried. She knew documents were disappearing. Witnesses were changing statements. Records were being altered. His gaze lowered slightly. She believed someone inside the council was orchestrating everything. Serafina's pulse quickened. Did she know who? No. Beaumont turned back toward them. But she was close. The answer settled heavily through the corridor. Close. Close enough to become dangerous. Close enough to vanish. Suddenly Evelyn Ashcombe felt more real than ever before. Not merely a victim. A woman actively searching for truth. A woman refusing to look away. Serafina understood that instinct better than she wished. Beaumont studied her face. Something softened in his expression. You have her determination. The observation arrived quietly. Without calculation. Without strategy. Honest. Serafina did not know how to respond. Because for the first time, hearing comparisons to her mother no longer felt like mystery. Felt like connection. Beaumont looked away first. There is another reason I agreed to tomorrow. The document? She asked. Partly. He hesitated. Then reached inside his coat. Cashin's attention sharpened immediately. Beaumont withdrew a small folded envelope. Worn. Protected carefully over many years. What is that? Serafina asked. The older man held the envelope gently, almost reverently. Something your mother left behind. Her breath caught. Beaumont extended it toward her. She accepted it with trembling fingers. The paper felt fragile. Time-worn. Real. On the front, written in elegant handwriting faded by years, were 6 simple words. To be given to my daughter. For one suspended moment the world seemed to stop. Serafina stared at the envelope without breathing. Her daughter. Not the girl. Not the child. Her daughter. Proof that Evelyn had thought of her. Named her. Loved her. Beaumont's voice softened. I kept it because I did not know where you were. Emotion tightened unexpectedly inside her chest. Too large. Too sudden. She lowered her eyes. The handwriting blurred briefly. Cashin noticed immediately. Of course he did. He stepped slightly closer without speaking. Not touching her. Simply present. The gesture mattered more than words. Beaumont watched the interaction carefully. Then something understanding entered his expression. He glanced away, offering privacy without leaving. Serafina traced the faded handwriting gently with one finger. 24 years. 24 years separated her from the woman who wrote those words. Yet suddenly the distance felt smaller. Human. Reachable. May I open it? She whispered. Beaumont shook his head slowly. Confusion flickered immediately. Why not? The older man looked directly at her. Because the letter inside is not the important thing. Silence followed. Then he added quietly, the important thing is what was hidden with it. Serafina felt her pulse stop. Cashin became completely still beside her. Beaumont's eyes shifted toward the envelope in her hands. Inside that packet, he said carefully, is a key. The corridor seemed to narrow around them. A key. Beaumont nodded once. And if the archives truly have been compromised tonight, it may be the only reason we still have a chance of finding the truth tomorrow. Serafina stared at the envelope in her hands as though it might vanish if she looked away. A key. Hidden for 24 years. Preserved by a woman she had never known and yet somehow missed her entire life. The realization felt impossible and deeply personal at the same time. Snow tapped softly against the tall windows behind them. The distant music from the ballroom drifted through the corridors of Ravenshire House. Somewhere beyond those walls, guests continued dancing beneath crystal chandeliers. Here, everything had changed. A key to what? She asked quietly. Beaumont folded his arms. For the first time that evening, he seemed less like a statesman and more like a weary guardian carrying a burden that had grown heavier with age. Your mother never told me exactly. Frustration flickered through Serafina immediately. Beaumont noticed. Before you become annoyed, understand something. Evelyn was careful. His gaze lowered briefly toward the envelope. She trusted very few people by the end. Including you? The question escaped before she could soften it. Beaumont accepted it without offense. Especially me after a certain point. Silence followed. The admission carried more honesty than she expected. Cashin leaned lightly against the window frame, watching, listening, allowing the conversation to unfold. Beaumont continued. She believed someone inside the inquiry was feeding information elsewhere. To whom? Serafina asked. That is the question she never managed to answer. The corridor grew quiet again. Serafina looked down at the faded handwriting. To be given to my daughter. Those 6 words felt more valuable than any inheritance. More valuable than titles. More valuable than hidden documents. Because they proved one thing beyond doubt. Evelyn Ashcombe had thought of her, planned for her, loved her enough to leave something behind. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. Beaumont noticed that too. You look like her. The words emerged softly, not as a revelation, as memory. Serafina lifted her eyes. Everyone keeps saying that. A faint smile touched his face. Because it is true. He hesitated, then added, but people focus on the wrong similarities. Cashin's attention sharpened slightly. Meaning? Beaumont looked toward the snow beyond the windows. Most remember Evelyn's appearance. His voice lowered. I remember her stubbornness. Despite everything. Serafina almost laughed. That does not sound complimentary. It was not meant to be. The older man glanced back toward her. The woman once argued with 3 members of parliament during a dinner party because she believed they were wrong. Serafina blinked. 3. At the same time, Cashin looked mildly amused. An ambitious strategy. A disastrous one. Beaumont shook his head slowly. She won. The image appeared instantly in Serafina's imagination. A young woman refusing to yield. Intelligent. Determined. Unwilling to remain silent. Not a shadow. Not a victim. Person. Somehow that mattered more than any mystery surrounding her disappearance. For years Evelyn had existed only as absence. Tonight she was becoming real. Beaumont seemed to understand exactly what she was thinking. There is something else you should know. His expression softened. The stories told about your mother were not entirely accidental. Serafina's stomach tightened. You mean the scandal? Yes. The answer arrived immediately. Many people found it convenient to reduce her life to gossip. His voice hardened slightly. A capable woman becomes easier to dismiss when society decides she was merely reckless. The words struck deeply, because Serafina understood them. She had lived her own version of that reality. People preferred simple stories. Unwanted daughter, burden, problem. Nobody asked whether those labels were true. Beaumont studied her face carefully. Your mother deserved better. The statement settled heavily in the quiet corridor. Before Serafina could answer, footsteps approached from the far end. All 3 turned. Mr. Harcourt appeared moments later, moving far more quickly than his usual dignified pace suggested. The archivist looked concerned. That alone was enough to draw immediate attention. Your Grace. He stopped before them and inclined his head briefly. I apologize for the interruption. Cashin straightened. What happened? Harcourt adjusted his spectacles. I received responses from 2 archive clerks. Serafina's pulse quickened instantly. The missing document, the note, the warning. Beaumont's expression darkened. Well? The archivist hesitated. Not a reassuring sign. The situation is complicated. It usually is, Cashin replied. Continue. Harcourt exhaled slowly. Officially, no document has been removed. Relief flickered briefly through Serafina, then vanished when she noticed no one else looked relieved. Officially? She asked. Harcourt nodded. Which is precisely the problem. He withdrew several folded papers from inside his coat. Records indicate someone accessed the archive room this afternoon. Silence followed. Immediate. Focused. Who? Beaumont asked. The entry was authorized. Harcourt looked uncomfortable. By a council seal. Serafina felt cold move through her chest. Council seal. The same institution connected to Evelyn. The same institution connected to the inquiry. The same institution that seemed to appear every time another piece of the mystery surfaced. Can you identify the individual? Cashin asked. Harcourt shook his head. Not yet. Beaumont swore softly under his breath again. Someone is cleaning up old mistakes. The statement hung in the air. Harcourt glanced toward him sharply. You believe the access was intentional? I believe coincidence stopped visiting this story years ago. No one argued, because no one could. Too many events had aligned too perfectly. Too many warnings had arrived at exactly the right moments. Too many people seemed invested in controlling the truth. Harcourt carefully handed one paper to Cashin. The Duke studied it silently. Then his expression changed. Not dramatically. Enough. Interesting. Serafina immediately stepped closer. What? Cashin handed her the document. She read quickly. Most of it consisted of administrative details. Dates. Signatures. Routine archive procedures. Then one line caught her attention. Access request approved under special authorization. House Valecrest reference file included. She looked up sharply. House Valecrest. Beaumont took the paper next. His eyes narrowed. That should not be there. Cashin remained very still. Agreed. Serafina stared between them. What does it mean? Neither answered immediately. That silence alone felt significant. Finally Beaumont spoke. Years ago, your mother's investigation crossed paths with another matter. What matter? Something connected to House Valecrest. Serafina turned toward Cashin. His expression revealed nothing, which in itself was revealing. You knew. Partially. The answer arrived calmly. My father knew more. The corridor seemed to narrow around those words. My father knew more. Serafina had spent weeks uncovering secrets surrounding her own family. Suddenly another possibility emerged. Perhaps those secrets had never belonged solely to her. Beaumont folded the document carefully. Your father and Cashin's father worked together briefly. The statement landed like a stone dropped into still water. Serafina blinked. What? Beaumont's gaze shifted toward her. Not publicly. You know who my father is? The question emerged instantly. Desperately. Beaumont hesitated, then looked away. The answer arrived anyway. Not through words. Through silence. Through the unmistakable expression of a man who knew far more than he wished to reveal. Serafina felt frustration rising again. Tomorrow, Beaumont said quietly. Everything tomorrow. People keep promising tomorrow. Her voice cracked slightly despite her efforts. And every time tomorrow arrives, another secret appears. The corridor fell silent. Beaumont looked genuinely pained by the observation. Before he could respond, Cashin spoke. His voice remained calm, steady, certain. This time will be different. Serafina turned toward him. Something in his expression made her pause. Not confidence. Conviction. The distinction mattered. He believed it. She could see that. Beaumont noticed too. For a brief moment, something understanding passed between the two men. Old history. Old knowledge. Unspoken things. Then Beaumont glanced toward the envelope still resting in Serafina's hands. Open it. She blinked. Now? Yes. His answer came immediately. The letter belongs to you. The world seemed to narrow once again. Slowly, carefully, she unfolded the aged paper. The seal cracked softly beneath her fingers. 24 years dissolved in that tiny sound. The handwriting inside matched the words on the envelope. Elegant, precise, beautifully familiar despite being seen for the first time. Serafina's breath caught. Dear Serafina. The simple greeting blurred instantly. She closed her eyes briefly before forcing herself to continue. The letter was not long, barely a page, yet every word felt precious. Evelyn wrote of hope, of courage, of uncertainty. She apologized for circumstances she could not explain. She spoke of love she prayed her daughter would never doubt. By the time Serafina reached the final paragraph, tears threatened despite every effort to remain composed. Then she saw the last line. The line that changed everything. If you are reading this, find the blue room beneath Valecrest Hall. The key will show you the rest. Silence filled the corridor. Complete. Absolute. Serafina lowered the letter slowly. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Beaumont looked stunned. Even Cashin appeared genuinely surprised. The Duke extended his hand toward the page. "May I?" She nodded. He read the final line once, then again. His gray eyes lifted toward hers. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared there. Real uncertainty. "There is no blue room beneath Valecrest Hall," he said quietly. And somewhere beyond the windows, snow continued falling across Ravenshire House, while an entirely new mystery began to unfold. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The letter remained in Cashin's hand. The final sentence seemed to linger in the air between them. "Find the blue room beneath Valecrest Hall. The key will show you the rest." Serafina looked from the page to the Duke. "You are certain?" Cashin nodded slowly. "I grew up at Valecrest Hall." His voice remained calm, though she could hear the strain beneath it. "I know every public room, every private study, every storage chamber, every wine cellar, every servant corridor." He glanced at the letter again. "There is no blue room." Beaumont folded his arms. "Then either your father concealed something from everyone, or Evelyn used another name for it," Harcourt suggested. The archivist adjusted his spectacles thoughtfully. "Hidden locations often acquire unofficial titles." Silence followed. The possibility settled heavily among them. Beaumont looked toward Serafina. "Did your mother ever mention Valecrest?" "Never." The answer came immediately. "I did not even know there was a connection until tonight." Beaumont nodded. He did not appear surprised. "That is what concerns me." Snow continued drifting beyond the windows. The ballroom music floated faintly through the corridor. Yet none of them seemed interested in returning to the celebration. The evening had become something else entirely. Puzzle. A trail left by a woman who had vanished 24 years earlier. Cashin reread the letter one final time before handing it back. "We are leaving." Serafina blinked. "Leaving?" "Yes." She glanced toward the ballroom. "The assembly is still happening. The assembly can survive without us." His tone left little room for debate. Beaumont looked mildly relieved. "A wise decision." Harcourt nodded in agreement. "The fewer witnesses to this conversation, the better." Serafina slipped the letter carefully back into its envelope. Then she placed it inside her reticule. The motion felt oddly significant. For years she had possessed nothing from her mother. Now she carried a piece of Evelyn's handwriting against her side. Somehow that small fact steadied her. Beaumont watched the movement. Something softened in his expression. "She would have been proud of you." The words struck unexpectedly. Serafina lowered her eyes. Not because she doubted them, because she wanted desperately to believe them. When she finally looked up, Beaumont was already glancing away, perhaps offering her privacy, perhaps protecting himself from memories. Either way, she appreciated it. "Tomorrow morning," he said quietly. 10 o'clock. Cashin inclined his head. "Provided the archives still exist." Beaumont's mouth tightened. "They exist." That was not the concern. A faint smile appeared despite the tension, then disappeared again. Beaumont became serious. "Be careful tonight." The warning felt different from the anonymous notes. Genuine. Personal. "Why?" Serafina asked. Beaumont hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because too many people have started moving." The statement lingered after he departed. Harcourt excused himself soon afterward, promising to continue investigating the archive records before dawn. That left only Serafina and Cashin standing in the quiet corridor. For several moments neither spoke. The distant orchestra shifted into another waltz. Somewhere nearby, guests laughed at something amusing. The contrast felt almost surreal. "Too many people have started moving," Serafina repeated softly. Cashin looked toward the snow-covered gardens outside. "He is probably correct." "That is not reassuring." "No." His gaze returned to hers. "It is not." She exhaled slowly. "A missing document. Anonymous messages. Hidden rooms that apparently do not exist." Her voice carried a trace of disbelief. "My life was much simpler when Lenora merely disliked me." To her surprise, Cashin laughed. Quietly, briefly. The sound transformed him. Not dramatically, just enough to remind her that beneath all the restraint lived a man capable of warmth. "There are moments," he admitted, "when I miss simpler problems as well." They began walking back toward the ballroom. The corridor lights cast golden reflections across polished floors. Their footsteps echoed softly in the quiet. "Do you think your father knew?" she asked suddenly. Cashin's expression became thoughtful. "About the room? About me?" Silence followed. Longer than she expected. "Possibly." The answer came carefully. "He knew Evelyn." Her pulse quickened. "You never told me that." "I never knew how much he knew." He glanced toward her. "Until tonight." The admission mattered. Cashin rarely spoke about uncertainty. He preferred facts, evidence, conclusions. Hearing him acknowledge doubt made the situation feel more real, more complicated. They reached the ballroom entrance and paused. Music swelled beneath the chandeliers. Couples crossed the dance floor. Society continued performing its elegant rituals. Yet something had changed. Serafina noticed it immediately. People were watching her. Not secretly. Not from curiosity alone. Openly now. Conversations quieted as she entered. Heads turned. Eyes followed. She felt the shift ripple through the room. "What happened?" she whispered. Cashin scanned the crowd. "News travels quickly." "What news?" Before he could answer, Lady Charlotte Pembroke appeared beside them. The young woman looked both excited and horrified. A difficult combination. "There you are." Charlotte lowered her voice immediately. "Half the ballroom is talking about you." Serafina stared. "That is never a promising sentence. Normally I would agree." Charlotte glanced around. "But tonight it may not be entirely terrible." Unease stirred. "Explain." Charlotte hesitated, then sighed. Someone recognized the name Ashcombe. The world seemed to narrow. "What?" "Not the whole story." Charlotte spoke quickly now. "Only fragments. Rumors. Connections." She shook her head. "You know how aristocrats are." Unfortunately, Serafina was beginning to learn. A single piece of information could become 20 different versions before dessert was served. "What exactly are they saying?" Charlotte winced. "Never a good sign." "That you may be connected to the old inquiry." Cashin's expression hardened immediately. Charlotte noticed and rushed onward. "Not negatively. At least not entirely." "That was not reassuring either," Serafina said. "I know." Charlotte looked genuinely apologetic. "But there is something else." Her voice softened. "Many people remember Evelyn Ashcombe differently than I expected." Serafina became very still. "Differently?" Charlotte nodded. "My grandmother spoke about her once." The young woman smiled faintly. "She called her the bravest woman in London." For a moment Serafina forgot how to respond. Around them, conversations continued. Music played. Yet all she could hear were those words. The bravest woman in London. Not scandal. Not disgrace. Not embarrassment. Brave. Charlotte seemed to sense the significance immediately. "I thought you should know." Emotion tightened unexpectedly in Serafina's chest. "Thank you." The younger woman squeezed her hand briefly, then departed before the moment could become awkward. Serafina watched her disappear into the crowd. Something inside her felt lighter. Not healed. Not resolved. Simply lighter. For years Evelyn's memory had been buried beneath secrets and rumors. Tonight she had heard 3 different people describe the woman. Brave. Intelligent. Honorable. The words mattered. They mattered more than she expected. Cashin studied her quietly. "You are thinking." "That is generally considered a normal activity." "Not with that expression." She glanced toward him. "And what expression is that?" His answer came after a slight pause. "Hope." The single word surprised her. Because he was right. Despite the missing documents. Despite the warnings. Despite the uncertainty. Hope had begun appearing in places she thought empty. Before she could respond, movement near the ballroom entrance caught her attention. A new arrival had entered. Late. Unusual for an event of this importance. The woman stood near the doorway removing her gloves while several guests turned in visible surprise. Serafina's breath caught instantly. She knew that posture. That expression. That face. Across the ballroom, beneath hundreds of lights, Lenora Evercott had just walked into Ravenshire House. And the moment their eyes met, Serafina knew she had not come by accident. Lenora Evercott never hurried. That was one of the first things Serafina had learned after entering the Evercott household as a child. Other people rushed when they wanted attention. Lenora simply expected it. The ballroom proved the lesson had not changed. Conversations continued for perhaps 3 seconds after her arrival. Then one by one they began to falter. Heads turned. Whispers spread. Curious eyes followed her progress across the marble floor. Serafina stood perfectly still. For years, that woman had controlled nearly every aspect of her life. The sight of her should have triggered the old familiar fear. Instead, something unexpected happened. She felt cautious, alert, suspicious, but not afraid. The realization startled her. Beside her, Cashin noticed immediately. "You are not retreating." Serafina kept her gaze fixed on Lenora. "I considered it. And," she exhaled slowly, "I remembered I do not live in her house anymore." Something softened briefly in his expression. Not enough to become obvious. Enough for her to see it. Across the ballroom, Lenora removed her gloves and handed them to a servant. Every movement remained perfectly controlled, perfectly elegant, perfectly calculated. Then she began walking toward them. "Of course she is coming here," Serafina murmured. "Naturally. You sound remarkably unsurprised. People rarely travel across London during a snowstorm without a purpose." Unfortunately, he was right. Lenora stopped several feet away. The distance was socially appropriate. The tension was not. For a brief moment, neither woman spoke. Serafina studied her carefully. Lenora looked exactly as she remembered. Impeccably dressed. Immaculately composed. The same flawless posture. The same measured expression. Yet tonight something appeared different. Not visible to strangers. Visible to someone who had spent years watching her. Lenora looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. As though recent weeks had forced adjustments she never anticipated making. "Serafina." The greeting sounded calm. Warm even. It might have fooled anyone who had never lived under her roof. It did not fool Serafina. "Mrs. Evercott." A flicker crossed Lenora's face. Tiny. Immediate. She had expected another form of address. The realization pleased Serafina more than it should have. Lenora recovered instantly. "You look well." The observation felt almost absurd considering the circumstances. "That is kind of you." "It is true." Silence followed. Around them, nearby guests pretended very badly not to listen. Several conversations had slowed to a crawl. Others had stopped entirely. Society loved many things. Public confrontations ranked surprisingly high on the list. Lenora finally shifted her attention toward Cashin. "Your Grace." Cashin inclined his head politely. Nothing more. Nothing less. The formality created distance. Lenora noticed. "I hope Ravenshire House has not suffered too greatly from my unexpected arrival." "The house remains standing." The answer carried enough dryness to nearly qualify as humor. Nearly. Lenora chose not to react. Her attention returned immediately to Serafina. "May we speak privately?" The request arrived smoothly. Reasonably. Entirely unacceptable. "No." The answer escaped before Serafina could soften it. Several nearby listeners suddenly became much more interested in their champagne. Lenora remained still. "No. No." Serafina met her gaze directly. "You preferred public decisions when I lived in your house. Public conversations seem appropriate now." For one suspended second, silence spread between them. Cashin remained beside her. Not intervening. Not rescuing. Simply present. The distinction mattered. Lenora's eyes narrowed slightly. "Not with anger. Calculation. You appear more confident. I appear informed." The response landed precisely where intended. Lenora's expression changed. Very little. Enough. Serafina saw it. So did Cashin. Information. That was the word causing discomfort. Not confidence. Not independence. Information. Lenora folded her hands lightly. Then perhaps you understand why I came. No. I came because certain rumors have begun circulating. Around them, several guests suddenly found nearby decorations fascinating. Nobody left. Nobody wanted to miss a single word. Serafina almost admired their honesty. Rumors about what? She asked. Lenora hesitated, then answered carefully. Your mother. The ballroom seemed to quiet around them. Not completely. Enough. Serafina felt her pulse slow. Not quicken. Slow. The calm surprised her. A month ago, hearing Evelyn mentioned would have unsettled her. Now it felt different. Now Evelyn had a face. A voice. A history. People had spoken about her tonight. Real people with real memories. Lenora no longer controlled that narrative. What about her? Lenora glanced briefly around the room. Certain stories are becoming distorted. Serafina almost laughed. The irony felt overwhelming. Distorted? Yes. Lenora's voice remained perfectly measured. People often romanticize the past. For the first time, genuine irritation stirred inside Serafina. Not because of the words, because of the implication. You mean they are saying positive things? A slight pause followed. Confirmation. Lenora recovered quickly. I mean they are forgetting context. Across the ballroom, Lord Beaumont had noticed the conversation. So had Sir Alistair Wren. Both men watched from a distance now. Neither approached. Neither looked comfortable. Interesting. Very interesting. Serafina studied Lenora carefully. Why are you really here? The question landed harder than anything else. Because it was direct. Honest. Difficult to evade. Lenora's expression became still. Then she smiled. Practiced smile. Familiar. Empty. Because despite our differences, I remain concerned about your future. This time Serafina did laugh. Quietly. Disbelievingly. Several nearby guests exchanged startled glances. Lenora's smile vanished. You find that amusing? I find it astonishing. The answer emerged gently. That made it sharper. You expelled me from your home. Silence. You attempted to prevent access to my inheritance. More silence. You spent years pretending my questions were inconveniences. Serafina tilted her head slightly. Concern arrived rather late. Around them, nobody pretended not to listen anymore. The ballroom had become an audience. Not openly. Effectively. Lenora understood that immediately. For perhaps the first time all evening, uncertainty entered her eyes. Tiny. Fleeting. Real. Then something unexpected happened. She sighed. The sound was soft. Almost weary. You truly believe I hated you? The statement caught Serafina off guard. Not because she believed it. Because Lenora sounded sincere. What exactly was I supposed to conclude? Lenora looked away briefly. Toward the dancers. Toward the chandeliers. Toward anything except Serafina. When she finally spoke again, her voice had changed. Less polished. More human. Your father made promises. The words struck like a bell. Immediate. Resonant. Serafina became completely still. Edwin. Lenora nodded. Before he died. Every nearby listener seemed to lean closer without physically moving. An impressive social skill. What promises? Serafina asked quietly. Lenora hesitated. Long enough to matter. Then she looked directly at her. He told me that if anyone ever came asking questions about Evelyn Ashcombe, I was to send them away. The world seemed to narrow instantly. Cashin's attention sharpened beside her. Across the room, Beaumont swore softly under his breath. Sir Alistair closed his eyes. Neither reaction escaped Serafina. Why? The question emerged almost as a whisper. Lenora's composure cracked for the first time all evening. Not dramatically. Enough. Because he was terrified. Silence followed. Heavy. Absolute. Terrified of what? Serafina asked. Lenora swallowed. The movement looked strangely difficult. Of the same people who frightened your mother. No one spoke. Not immediately. Because suddenly the conversation had become something far larger than family conflict. Far larger than inheritance. Serafina stared at the woman she had spent years resenting. For the first time, She wondered whether fear had shaped Lenora's decisions more than cruelty. Not excused them, shaped them. The distinction mattered. Before she could ask another question, movement erupted near the ballroom entrance. A servant hurried inside carrying a sealed dispatch. His expression alone was enough to attract attention. He crossed the room quickly, directly toward Cashin. The ballroom grew quieter with every step. The servant stopped before the Duke and bowed. "Your Grace." Cashin accepted the document immediately. The seal bore the mark of House Veilcrest. Urgent correspondence. Delivered at night. Never a good sign. Serafina watched as he opened it. His eyes moved across the contents once. Then again. Every trace of warmth disappeared from his expression. "Cashin?" she asked quietly. The Duke looked up. For the first time since she met him, genuine shock lived behind his eyes. Not fear. Not concern. Shock. Slowly, he folded the message. Then he spoke the sentence that silenced the entire corner of the ballroom. "Someone has just discovered a sealed chamber beneath Veilcrest Hall." The silence lasted only a few seconds. Felt much longer. Around them, the ballroom remained frozen beneath the weight of Cashin's announcement. A sealed chamber beneath Veilcrest Hall. The words seemed impossible. Yet the expression on the Duke's face left little room for doubt. Serafina felt her pulse hammering beneath her ribs. In her reticule rested Evelyn's letter. In that letter were 6 words. "Find the blue room beneath Veilcrest Hall." Suddenly those words no longer sounded impossible. They sounded precise. "Let me see it." Her voice emerged quieter than intended. Cashin handed her the dispatch immediately. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. Not from fear. From anticipation. The message itself was brief. Urgent. Written in a hurried hand. During renovation work beneath the east wing, laborers discovered a concealed stone doorway hidden behind shelving. Access remains unopened pending your instructions. The location appears deliberately sealed. Serafina read the words twice. Then a third time. Every sentence seemed to echo something Evelyn had written 24 years earlier. Beaumont stepped closer. "East wing." Cashin nodded. "The oldest section of the estate." Sir Alistair had crossed the ballroom by now. Whatever hesitation once existed had vanished. "How old?" he asked. Cashin considered briefly. "More than 80 years. Alistair's expression darkened immediately. "Old enough." Nobody needed clarification. Old enough to exist before Evelyn. Old enough to hide records. Old enough to preserve secrets. Around them, aristocratic curiosity had reached dangerous levels. Conversations no longer disguised themselves. Guests openly watched, speculated, whispered. Ravenshire House had become the center of London's most intriguing mystery in a single evening. Lenora remained nearby, silent now, observing everything. For the first time, Serafina noticed genuine uncertainty in her face. Whatever game everyone had been playing, the discovery of the chamber appeared to surprise her as much as everyone else. "We should leave," Beaumont said quietly. Cashin agreed immediately. "Yes." Sir Alistair nodded. "Before half the ballroom follows us to Veilcrest." That observation was probably accurate. Serafina folded the dispatch carefully and returned it. The movement felt strangely symbolic. One mystery had just transformed into another. Yet for the first time, she sensed movement toward answers instead of away from them. Before they could depart, a familiar voice interrupted. "You are leaving already?" Lady Charlotte Pembroke approached through the crowd. Her expression combined disappointment and concern. "That is unfortunate." She glanced between them. Something happened. Not a question. An observation. Serafina almost smiled. Charlotte possessed remarkable instincts. Several things happened. Charlotte's eyes widened. "That sounds considerably more interesting than my evening." "Trust me," Serafina replied softly. "You would prefer your evening." Charlotte looked unconvinced. Then her expression softened. "Perhaps." She hesitated. "Will I see you after Christmas?" The question surprised Serafina more than it should have. Friendship felt unfamiliar, precious. "I hope so." Charlotte squeezed her hand warmly. "Good." Then she lowered her voice. For what it is worth, most people here are rooting for you. The statement stunned her. Most people do not even know me. That has never prevented society from choosing favorites. Charlotte smiled. Tonight, they chose you. Before Serafina could respond, Charlotte disappeared back into the crowd, leaving unexpected warmth behind. Chose you. The phrase lingered. Strange. Wonderful. Difficult to believe. Cashin watched her expression carefully. You are surprised. By many things tonight. That one in particular. She looked around the ballroom, at the elegant guests, the glowing chandeliers, the countless conversations. 1 year ago she would have entered a room like this feeling invisible. Tonight people knew her name, not because of scandal, not because of pity, because they were curious, interested, invested. The realization felt almost unreal. Beaumont cleared his throat gently. We should go. Reality returned immediately. The chamber, the letter, the hidden key, tomorrow's meeting, everything waiting ahead. Together they crossed the ballroom. This time nobody pretended not to watch. Heads turned openly. Conversations paused. The atmosphere felt entirely different from when Serafina first descended the grand staircase earlier that evening. Then she had been a mystery. Now she had become a story. Near the entrance, Lenora stepped forward unexpectedly. Serafina. She stopped. Slowly. Cashin remained beside her. Beaumont and Alistair exchanged wary glances. Lenora's eyes settled on the envelope partially visible within Serafina's reticule. Recognition flashed immediately. Sharp. Unmistakable. You found it. The words emerged before Lenora could stop them. Silence followed. Immediate. Absolute. Serafina stared. You know this letter? For the first time all evening, Lenora looked genuinely trapped. Not socially. Emotionally. She stopped. Beaumont's attention sharpened. So did Alistair's. Cashin became completely still. Lenora exhaled slowly. Edwin showed it to me once. The admission sent a shock through the group. When? Serafina asked. Years ago. Lenora looked away briefly. Before he died. Questions exploded instantly. Too many to count. Too many to ask at once. Why did he have it? Lenora swallowed. Because it was delivered to him. The world seemed to narrow around those words. Beaumont stepped forward immediately. That is impossible. Apparently not. Lenora met his gaze. It arrived by courier 3 weeks before Evelyn disappeared. Nobody spoke. The implications settled heavily over everyone present. 3 weeks before Evelyn disappeared. The timing changed everything. Serafina felt cold spreading through her chest. Why was it delivered to Edwin? Lenora's eyes shifted toward her. Something like regret appeared there. Real regret. Because he was supposed to keep it safe. Another silence followed. Deeper this time. More dangerous. Cashin's voice broke it. Calm. Precise. Safe from whom? Lenora closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, 20 years seemed to weigh upon her shoulders. The same man your mother feared. Every person standing there became still. Beaumont looked as though someone had struck him. Alistair's face drained of color. Cashin's jaw tightened visibly. Serafina felt her heartbeat pounding. Who? The question emerged almost as a whisper. Lenora stared at her, then toward Beaumont, then Alistair. Finally she looked directly at Cashin. You already know the name. Nobody answered. The silence itself became an answer. Serafina turned slowly toward the Duke. His expression revealed nothing, yet she could feel the tension surrounding him. Feel it in the stillness. Feel it in the careful control. Cashin. Her voice softened. What is she talking about? Before he could answer, Beaumont spoke. His voice sounded older than before. Heavier. The man Evelyn feared was never hidden inside the council. Serafina looked toward him. Every instinct told her the next words would change everything. Beaumont's eyes shifted to the Duke, then back to her. He controlled people inside the council. The ballroom seemed impossibly distant now. Music, laughter, celebration. None of it mattered. Only this conversation. only this truth struggling toward the surface. Who was he? She asked again. Beaumont hesitated. Just once. Then he answered. The former Duke of Valecrest. Complete silence followed. Seraphina could not move, could not think, could not breathe. Beside her, Cashin remained absolutely motionless. Snow drifted beyond the towering windows. Christmas lights glowed across Ravenshire Square. And suddenly the mystery that had begun with Evelyn Ashcombe no longer pointed toward a distant stranger. It pointed directly into the heart of House Valecrest itself. The former Duke of Valecrest. The words settled over the group like falling stone. For a moment nobody moved. The ballroom continued around them, filled with music and conversation, but it felt impossibly distant now. Seraphina stared at Beaumont, then at Cashin, then back again. Her thoughts refused to organize themselves into anything coherent, because one impossible question had suddenly become unavoidable. If the former Duke of Valecrest stood at the center of Evelyn Ashcombe's fears, then why had Cashin spent weeks helping her uncover the truth? The contradiction struck harder than the revelation itself. Beaumont seemed to recognize the conflict immediately. Before anyone reaches conclusions, he said quietly, there are facts you do not yet know. Cashin's gaze remained fixed on him. Then perhaps this would be an excellent time to share them. The older man nodded once. Agreed. Around them, curiosity continued building among nearby guests. Ravenshire House had become far too public for a conversation of this magnitude. Sir Alistair glanced toward the ballroom entrance. This discussion cannot continue here. For once, everyone agreed. Within minutes, they had withdrawn to one of the private drawing rooms overlooking the eastern gardens. The room was warm and elegant. A fire burned quietly inside the marble hearth. Snow drifted beyond tall windows. Christmas lights glowed along distant pathways. Yet none of it softened the tension surrounding the room. The door closed behind them. Silence followed. Seraphina remained standing. She could not imagine sitting. Not now. Lenora occupied a chair near the fire. Beaumont stood beside the mantel. Alistair remained near the windows. Cashin stood several feet away from everyone else. The arrangement felt accidental. It was not. Everyone was positioning themselves around a truth none of them fully trusted. Finally Beaumont spoke. The former Duke of Valecrest was not your father. Relief arrived so quickly that Seraphina almost felt dizzy. Then confusion replaced it immediately. Then why is he involved? Beaumont exhaled slowly. Because he controlled access. To what? Everything. The answer came from Sir Alistair. His voice carried decades of frustration. Political appointments, council influence, financial investigations, inheritance disputes. He looked toward Seraphina. The man spent 30 years building a network of obligations. Cashin remained silent. Seraphina noticed that carefully. He was listening, not defending. Listening. Alistair continued. When Evelyn began asking questions, she encountered that network repeatedly. What questions? Seraphina asked. Beaumont exchanged a glance with Alistair. A long one, the kind shared by people remembering things they wished they could forget. Your mother believed several inheritance cases had been manipulated. Beaumont's voice softened. At first, nobody took her seriously. Lenora looked down at her hands. For the first time that evening, she seemed uncomfortable hearing the story. Then she started finding evidence, Alistair added. Small inconsistencies, missing signatures, altered documents. Seraphina felt her pulse quicken. Missing documents, altered records. The pattern sounded painfully familiar. The same things happening now. Beaumont nodded. Exactly. The realization settled heavily through the room. History was repeating itself. Or perhaps it had never truly stopped. Seraphina looked toward Cashin. Did your father know? His answer came immediately. No. The certainty surprised everyone, including Beaumont. Cashin met their expressions calmly. My father and the former Duke were not the same man. Silence followed. Then Lenora spoke unexpectedly. That is true. Every head turned toward her. She looked almost annoyed by the attention. I knew his father. Her gaze shifted toward Cashin. He spent half his life correcting mistakes he inherited. The room grew quiet again. Serafina studied Lenora carefully. The woman sounded sincere. That alone felt remarkable. Cashin's expression remained unreadable. Yet something changed behind his eyes. Not gratitude, recognition. Lenora was telling the truth. Beaumont folded his arms. Which is why Evelyn trusted him. Serafina froze. Trusted who? Cashin's father. The answer arrived quietly. Instantly. The room seemed to narrow around those words. Serafina turned toward Cashin. He looked genuinely surprised. Not by the information itself. By the fact it had finally been spoken aloud. Beaumont noticed. You did not know? Cashin shook his head once. No. The older man appeared thoughtful. Then regretful. Perhaps we should have told you years ago. Perhaps. The response carried no accusation. Only fact. Alistair moved away from the window. After Evelyn realized the scope of the corruption, she approached several people. His gaze settled on Serafina. Most refused to help. But not Cashin's father. No. Alistair's expression softened. Not him. A strange warmth touched Serafina's chest. Unexpected. Complicated. Because suddenly a new image was emerging. Evelyn Ashcombe had not been entirely alone. Someone had believed her. Someone had helped. Someone connected to House Valecrest. Beaumont crossed toward a small table and poured himself a glass of water. The simple gesture somehow made him seem older, more human. The former Duke discovered she was investigating. His voice lowered. After that, everything accelerated. Accelerated how? Serafina asked. No one answered immediately. The silence felt different this time. Not evasive. Careful. Finally Beaumont spoke. People began receiving pressure. Threats. Not openly. He shook his head. Influential men rarely threaten directly. They simply make life difficult. Lenora laughed softly. The sound held no humor. That has not changed. Nobody disagreed. Serafina moved closer to the fire. The warmth helped her think. Then what happened? Beaumont looked toward the flames. Evelyn found something. Her pulse quickened instantly. What? We never knew. The answer landed like disappointment. Beaumont noticed immediately. We knew it mattered. We knew she intended to preserve it. His eyes lifted toward Serafina. And now we know where she hid it. The key. The letter. The sealed chamber beneath Valecrest Hall. Suddenly every thread connected again. Alistair nodded slowly. That chamber was not built for storage. How do you know? Serafina asked. Cashin answered before anyone else could. Because I reviewed the original estate plans after the dispatch arrived. Every eye shifted toward him. For the first time since entering the room, a faint trace of excitement appeared beneath his composure. The chamber does not exist on any official blueprint. Silence followed. Immediate and absolute. Beaumont stared. Impossible. No. Cashin reached into his coat and removed several folded papers. Merely hidden. He spread them across the table. Everyone gathered closer. Serafina leaned over the documents. Detailed architectural drawings covered the pages. Corridors. Foundations. Storage vaults. Service passages. Then she saw it. A blank space. Small. Unmarked. Impossible to explain. Located directly beneath the east wing. There. Cashin tapped the page lightly. An empty section with no documented purpose. Alistair looked stunned. Beaumont looked furious. Lenora looked frightened. The reactions told Serafina everything she needed to know. The chamber was real. It had always been real. Evelyn had not imagined it. My father hid this, Cashin said quietly. Or protected it. The distinction mattered. Beaumont nodded slowly. Protected. Serafina looked down at the envelope resting in her hands. 24 years ago, Evelyn had written a letter to a daughter she might never see again. She had hidden a key, hidden evidence, hidden hope, and somehow she had trusted House Valecrest to keep it safe. The thought tightened her throat unexpectedly. Cashin noticed. Of course he did. Their eyes met briefly across the table. No words passed between them. None were necessary. Then a sharp knock sounded at the door. Everyone became still. The sound seemed unnaturally loud. A servant entered moments later. Young, nervous, breathless from hurrying through the mansion. "Your Grace." Cashin straightened immediately. "What is it?" The servant swallowed. "A messenger has arrived from Valecrest Hall." The room fell silent. The young man looked toward the group uncertainly. Then back to the Duke. "The sealed chamber has been opened." No one moved. No one breathed. And then the servant delivered the message that changed everything once again. Inside, they found a locked iron chest bearing Evelyn Ashcombe's name. For several heartbeats, nobody in the room reacted. The servant remained standing near the doorway, uncertain whether he had just delivered remarkable news or catastrophic news. The answer, Serafina suspected, was both. An iron chest bearing Evelyn Ashcombe's name. 24 years of mystery suddenly condensed into a single object waiting beneath Valecrest Hall. The fire crackled softly inside the hearth. Snow drifted beyond the windows. Christmas Eve continued outside while history quietly rearranged itself inside a private drawing room. "Are you certain?" Beaumont asked. The servant nodded immediately. "Yes, sir. The steward sent the message personally." Cashin extended his hand. "The dispatch." The servant produced a folded document. Cashin accepted it and read quickly. His eyes moved across the page once. Then again. Serafina noticed something she had come to recognize over the past weeks. Whenever information confirmed his suspicions, he became very still. He was becoming very still now. "It is genuine," he said quietly. Relief and anxiety arrived simultaneously. Serafina almost laughed at the absurdity of that combination. Instead, she remained silent. Beaumont exhaled heavily. Sir Alistair lowered himself into a nearby chair as though the strength had suddenly left his legs. Lenora stared into the fire. Her expression looked distant, thoughtful, troubled. Cashin folded the dispatch carefully. "The chest remains unopened." "Good," Beaumont said immediately. "Very good." Serafina looked toward him. "Why good?" "Because if Evelyn intended those contents to survive, then chain of custody matters." The answer carried the instincts of a man who had spent decades navigating political disasters. If the chest remains sealed, nobody can question what was found. Sir Alistair nodded slowly. "For once, Beaumont is correct. An event worthy of documentation." Despite the tension, a faint smile touched several faces, then disappeared. The reality remained. The chest existed. The chamber existed. Evelyn's final safeguard existed. Serafina looked down at the envelope resting in her hands. The key remained hidden inside, waiting. Somehow she felt connected to the woman who had written that letter more strongly than ever before. Not because of the mystery, because of the intention. Evelyn had planned, protected, prepared. She had not surrendered to fear. The realization filled Serafina with unexpected pride. "We leave tonight." Cashin's voice broke through her thoughts. Every eye turned toward him. Beaumont frowned. "The roads are covered in snow. The roads still function. It is nearly midnight. The chest has waited 24 years. Cashin's gaze remained steady. "I do not intend to leave it unattended for another 12 hours. Nobody argued, because nobody truly disagreed. The urgency felt justified, necessary, real. Within minutes, decisions were being made. Carriages prepared. Servants dispatched. Instructions delivered. The room transformed from reflection into action. Through it all, Serafina remained strangely calm. Perhaps because the uncertainty that had haunted her for so long was finally narrowing towards something tangible. Not rumors. Not theories. Evidence. Beaumont approached her while the others discussed travel arrangements. For several moments he simply stood beside her, watching the snow beyond the windows. "You look different." She glanced toward him. "Different from when?" "Earlier tonight." The answer surprised her. Beaumont smiled faintly. "You arrived searching for answers." His gaze softened. "Now you look ready to face them." The observation lingered. Serafina considered denying it. Instead she found herself nodding slowly. I think I am tired of being afraid of the truth. Beaumont studied her quietly. Then something gentle appeared in his expression. Your mother said almost exactly the same thing once. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in her throat. Beaumont seemed to notice. He looked away first, offering dignity rather than sympathy. She appreciated that more than he probably realized. Across the room, Lenora rose from her chair. The movement attracted immediate attention. She crossed toward Serafina slowly, not with her usual confidence. Something quieter, more uncertain. The difference felt significant. I will not be joining you. The statement surprised no one. Yet the tone did. Lenora sounded tired. Not manipulative. Not defensive. Simply tired. Serafina regarded her carefully. Why not? Lenora hesitated, then answered honestly. Because some truths belong to you. Silence followed. The admission felt almost impossible coming from her. Lenora managed a faint smile. Besides, I suspect my presence would improve nobody's evening. To Serafina's astonishment, a small laugh escaped. Lenora looked equally surprised. Then something softened between them. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Understanding, perhaps. The beginning of it. Edwin loved you, Lenora said quietly. The words arrived without warning. Serafina froze. I know. No. Lenora shook her head gently. I do not think you do. The older woman's eyes glistened briefly in the firelight. He never regretted bringing you home. Emotion swept through Serafina so suddenly that she could not answer. For years she had questioned everything about her place in the Evercott family. Everything. Hearing those words now felt like discovering another missing piece of herself. Lenora stepped back. Whatever happens at Valecrest Hall, remember that. Then she turned away before the moment could become more complicated. Serafina watched her go. Something inside her shifted quietly. Not enough to erase old wounds. Enough to recognize that people were often more complicated than their worst decisions. Cashin approached moments later. The others had already begun departing the room, preparing for the journey ahead. Soon only the two of them remained near the fire. Snow reflected softly through the windows. Silence settled comfortably between them. Familiar now. Are you ready? He asked. The question seemed simple. It was not. Ready to discover her father. Ready to uncover Evelyn's secrets. Ready to confront 24 years of hidden history. Ready to learn whether hope and disappointment would arrive together. Serafina looked toward the flames, then toward the envelope in her hands, finally toward the man standing beside her. No. The answer emerged honestly. Cashin nodded. Good. She stared. That was exactly your response earlier tonight. It remains accurate. Amusement touched her despite everything. You are remarkably consistent. A flaw I continue to cultivate. The corner of her mouth lifted, then faded, because another realization had arrived. Quiet, unavoidable, throughout every revelation, every setback, every frightening discovery. Cashin had remained beside her. Not because he owed her anything. Not because it benefited him. Because he chose to. The thought warmed something deep inside her chest. Dangerous territory. Meaningful territory. She lowered her gaze briefly. Thank you. The words came softly. Genuine. Cashin became very still. For what? She almost laughed. That is an unusually long list. His expression softened. Barely. Then choose one. Serafina considered. There were too many reasons. Too many moments. Too many acts of quiet loyalty. Finally she answered with the simplest truth she could find. For believing me before there was proof. Silence followed. Long enough to matter. When Cashin finally spoke, his voice had changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. That was never difficult. The words settled between them. Warm. Steady. Honest. Neither looked away immediately. Outside, snow continued falling across Ravenshire Square. Inside, the fire burned quietly. For one suspended moment, the mystery faded into the background. Not disappeared. Waited. Then footsteps approached from the hallway. Reality returned. A servant appeared at the doorway. "Your Grace." Cashin turned. "Yes. The carriages are ready." The moment ended gently, naturally. Yet something remained behind. Unspoken. Growing. Serafina felt it as they left the drawing room together. Felt it while crossing the quiet corridors of Ravenshire House. Felt it while descending the grand staircase. Guests still occupied portions of the ballroom. Music still played. Christmas still glowed beneath chandeliers. Yet her path no longer felt uncertain. Not entirely. As she reached the entrance hall, a final thought surfaced unexpectedly. 24 years ago, Evelyn Ashcombe had hidden a key and trusted the future. Tonight, that future was arriving. And somewhere beneath the snow-covered grounds of Valecrest Hall, an iron chest waited in darkness. Inside it lay the truth her mother had protected for almost a quarter of a century. And before dawn arrived, Serafina would finally discover why. The journey to Valecrest Hall felt suspended between two worlds. Behind them remained Ravenshire House with its music, chandeliers, and Christmas celebrations. Ahead waited 24 years of unanswered questions buried beneath stone and silence. Snow fell steadily as the carriage moved through the darkness. The roads glimmered silver beneath moonlight. Inside the carriage, no one spoke for long stretches of time. Beaumont sat opposite Serafina. Sir Alistair occupied the seat beside him. Cashin remained next to her. Calm, quiet, watchful. The rhythm of the wheels against the frozen road became the only sound. Eventually Beaumont broke the silence. "Your mother hated long carriage rides." The unexpected comment drew everyone's attention. A faint smile touched his face. She claimed they encouraged unnecessary thinking. Serafina looked down at the envelope resting in her hands. "I suspect she and I inherited the same problem." Beaumont's smile deepened slightly. "That is becoming increasingly obvious." The conversation faded again. Yet somehow the memory remained. Another small piece of Evelyn. Another reminder that she had been a living woman rather than a mystery. By the time the first outlines of Valecrest Hall emerged through the snow, dawn had begun touching the horizon. Pale gray light spread across the countryside. The vast estate rose from the winter landscape like something preserved outside time itself. Tall towers, ancient stone, hundreds of windows reflecting the approaching morning. Serafina had visited before. Yet today it looked different. Today it felt like the center of a story waiting to be finished. Several servants waited at the entrance. Their expressions revealed equal parts curiosity and concern. News had clearly traveled quickly. Cashin stepped from the carriage first and offered his hand. Serafina accepted it. The gesture felt natural now. Familiar. That realization startled her briefly. Then the moment passed. Inside the house, the atmosphere felt entirely different from the warmth of Ravenshire House. Here everything seemed focused, quiet, expectant. The steward approached immediately. "Your Grace." Cashin nodded. "The chamber." Secured. Relief appeared across several faces. The steward continued. "Nothing has been disturbed." "The chest?" Beaumont asked. "Untouched." "Good." The single word seemed to settle through the group collectively. They crossed the hall without delay. Servants moved aside respectfully. Corridors stretched ahead beneath portraits of generations long gone. Eventually they descended a narrow stone staircase beneath the east wing. The air grew cooler, older. The foundations of the estate surrounded them. At the bottom of the stairs, several lanterns illuminated a newly exposed section of wall. Workers had already removed shelving and debris. Behind it stood a stone doorway hidden for decades. Serafina stopped breathing for a moment. It was real. Every letter, every clue, every fragment of Evelyn's trail had led here. The steward approached the doorway. "We found it yesterday afternoon during repairs." His voice echoed softly. The seal had never been broken. Cashin studied the stonework carefully. "My father knew." Beaumont nodded. "Yes." Nobody doubted it now. A keyhole rested beside the doorway. Small, elegant, waiting. Slowly, every gaze turned toward Serafina, toward the envelope, toward the key hidden inside. Her pulse quickened. 24 years. 24 years had led to this moment. Carefully she unfolded the packet. The small brass key slid into her palm. Time had darkened the metal slightly, yet it remained intact, preserved, waiting. Cashin stepped closer, not taking over, not directing, simply standing beside her. The support mattered more than words. Serafina approached the door. Her hands trembled slightly. She did not hide it. There was no reason to. Some moments deserved honesty. She inserted the key. For 1 second nothing happened. Then came a soft click. The sound echoed through the chamber. Beaumont closed his eyes briefly. Sir Alistair exhaled. The lock had opened. Together, Cashin and the steward pushed the stone door inward. Dust drifted through the lantern light. A hidden room slowly emerged from darkness. Serafina stared. The room was not large. Yet every wall had been painted a deep blue color that had faded only slightly with age. The blue room. Evelyn had been telling the truth all along. Silence filled the chamber, complete and reverent. The room contained shelves, cabinets, a writing desk, several sealed boxes, everything preserved exactly as it had been left decades earlier. Then Serafina saw it, an iron chest resting against the far wall. Her breath caught immediately. Evelyn Ashcombe. The name remained engraved across a small brass plate. Real. Undeniable. The chest existed. Slowly she crossed the room. Nobody stopped her. Nobody spoke. The key still rested in her hand. A second lock waited on the chest itself. Smaller than the first. More personal. Beaumont looked almost emotional. She planned everything. Yes, Alistair whispered. She did. Serafina knelt before the chest. The second key fit perfectly. Another click followed. Then another silence. This one deeper than before. She lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of carefully organized documents. Letters, journals, financial records, sealed packets, evidence preserved against time. For several moments no one moved. The sheer volume of material felt overwhelming. Then something resting on top caught her attention. A single envelope, newer than the others, marked clearly in Evelyn's handwriting. For my daughter. Tears threatened instantly. Serafina picked it up carefully. Her hands shook now. She could not stop them. She did not try. Beaumont quietly looked away, giving her privacy. Sir Alistair did the same. Even Cashin stepped back slightly, respecting the moment. Slowly, she opened the envelope. A final letter waited inside. The handwriting appeared steady, certain, hopeful. Dear Serafina, if you are reading this, then kindness survived longer than fear. The first sentence blurred immediately through tears. She blinked and continued. Evelyn wrote about courage, about mistakes, about uncertainty. She explained that she never intended to leave her daughter, that circumstances beyond her control had forced impossible choices. Yet every page returned to the same message. Love, unconditional and enduring. Serafina read in silence while the room remained still around her. Then she reached the final page. The final paragraphs. The truth she had searched for all her life. Your father was a good man. He was not wealthy enough to silence powerful enemies, nor influential enough to defeat them. But he was honorable. His name was Jonathan Ashford. He died protecting evidence that others wanted destroyed. He never knew you would be born. Yet he loved you from the moment he learned of your existence. Serafina closed her eyes. Jonathan Ashford. At last. A name. Not mystery. Not absence. A real person. A father. Tears slipped quietly down her cheeks. She did not hide them. She had earned them. The room remained silent, respectful, patient. Eventually she opened her eyes again and continued reading. The final paragraph changed everything once more. If House Valecrest still stands when this letter is found, thank the family who protected these records. Without them, none of this survives. Serafina lowered the page slowly. Her gaze lifted toward Cashin. The Duke stood several feet away, motionless, watching her with quiet concern. Understanding settled over the room. Not suspicion, not scandal. Understanding. Evelyn had trusted House Valecrest. Cashin's family had protected the truth. not hidden it, protected it. Beaumont broke the silence first. Then it is over. The words echoed softly through the blue room. Surprisingly, no one argued. Because he was right. The mystery was over. The questions had answers. The secrets had names. The missing pieces had finally returned. Serafina looked around the room one last time. At the records. At the evidence. At the legacy her mother left behind. Then she folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her heart. Something inside her settled for the first time in years. Not because every wound had healed. Because the uncertainty had ended. She knew who she was. She knew where she came from. She knew she had been loved. Outside, dawn finally broke across the snow-covered grounds of Valecrest Hall. Golden light streamed through the hidden room's narrow windows. The darkness retreated. Cashin approached quietly, not speaking immediately, simply standing beside her. Together they watched the sunlight reach the old blue walls. "What happens now?" he asked softly. Serafina looked toward the morning light, then toward the future waiting beyond it. For the first time, the answer felt simple. Now we live. A faint smile appeared in his eyes. Real this time. Unhidden. Good. She smiled back. Not because every challenge had disappeared. Not because life would become perfect. Because hope no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to her. And as the first Christmas morning sunlight filled the blue room beneath Valecrest Hall, the story that began with secrets ended with truth, with family restored, with love remembered, and with a future finally free to begin.